Hi everyone, welcome back to the Off the Hook Crochet channel. In this video I'm going to introduce you to the cluster stitch. It's a versatile and surprisingly customizable stitch that adds unique texture and visual interest to your crochet projects. Now before we dive in, I need to discuss what sets the cluster stitch apart from other grouped stitches. While the bobble stitch is technically a type of cluster, the term cluster stitch actually covers more than just bobbles. A classic bobble creates a pronounced bump that pops out from your fabric, like this. The cluster stitch, on the other hand, is a technique where you combine multiple partially completed stitches together at the top, closing them into a single group. Clusters can be worked with any number or even a mix of stitch heights. Single, half double, double, or triple crochet stitches can be used. You'll see a lot of variation with clusters. Sometimes they're worked all into one stitch or one space, and sometimes they can span across consecutive stitches. And depending on the technique and the stitches used, a cluster can lay flat like this, adding to the density of the row or even create a subtle textured look. Because of this versatility, you'll find clusters used everywhere, from lacy open work to dense plush fabrics. So I've gone ahead and crocheted an example piece where I will show you how cluster stitches can be used to add density, but the piece remains flat. In this sample here, I'm using the triple crochet to make the clusters, mixed in with regular single and double crochets on either side, so you can see how they stand out against basic stitches. Remember, clusters aren't limited to just one way of making them. They can be adjusted for different looks and effects depending on the pattern. So let's get started with the next iteration of this petal pattern that I'm working on, and I'll show you a variation of a cluster stitch that I love to use. So my next iteration, I start with a double crochet, and then I chain 2, and my cluster is going to be made in the next stitch here, and I'm doing it with a triple crochet. So I'm going to yarn over 2 times, I insert into the stitch, yarn over, pull through, and I'm going to yarn over and pull through only the first 2 loops. Then I yarn over again, insert into the same space, pull the yarn through, and I yarn over and pull through 2. And then I yarn over and pull through 2 3 times. And that completes my triple crochet cluster. As you can see, this is a little bit wider, so more dense than just a standalone stitch, like the double crochet that's below it. It's wider than that, so that's what's adding density to my work. And then at the top, it's making this nice point, like a teardrop, where I have 1 loop to crochet into that represents this stitch on the next round. I'm going to separate my clusters by a chain 2, and then into the same stitch I'm going to go back and make another triple crochet cluster. Yarn over twice, insert, yarn over, pull through, and then yarn over, pull through only 2. Yarn over again, insert, and then pull through 2. Now with the 4 loops on my hook, I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2 3 times, and that finishes my second little cluster in this space. I'll chain 2 again and then make my third and final triple crochet cluster in this space. Yarn over 2 times, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over 1 more time, insert, come through, yarn over, pull through 2, and with the 4 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through 2 3 times. And there's my third triple crochet cluster in that space. I make another chain 2, and then a regular double crochet into the next stitch, and then I bring the height of my work down even further with a single crochet in between my petals. And that is one iteration in the sequence of petals that I'm making to go around. I'm going to do one more with you here. Yarn over twice, insert to the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2 3 times, chain 2, and I'll make my next cluster, separate by chain 2, And then my third final cluster in the same space. One, two, three. Chain 2 again, and then I bring my height down with a double crochet, and then I finish with a single, and that finishes my round of petals. Now you can see all the clusters adding a nice definition to each petal. The base of each petal is nice and full, adding to the density, and then where the tops are skinnier than the bottom, you see these lacy looking spaces towards the tops of the petals here. Now here's another example of a cluster stitch, and as you can see, it produces a flat fabric. While it does add a slight texture and some definition to the piece, it does not have a high profile like the bobble stitch does. As you can see, a clear difference here. We make the cluster stitch in a similar way as the bobble, but we do not reduce the height of the stitches around it to make the cluster pop out. Instead, we keep the working height consistent as we go along the row, which keeps our work flat. Here in pink, I've crocheted a row of single crochets with a chain 1 separating each of them. And in the chain 1 space, I'll make a simple cluster stitch for you. So I'm going to connect the blue yarn, the yarn I'm using to make the cluster stitches, and I'm putting a double crochet on the ends, on each end of the row of the cluster stitches, just to maintain the height. And then I will start immediately crocheting a cluster stitch right in that chain 1 space. So we yarn over, we insert, yarn over and pull through, yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops. And we'll do that 2 more times. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, 2 loops. Yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we have 4 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over and pull through all 4. After I do this cluster stitch here, I make 1 chain, and what this does is it does a couple things. It keeps my stitch count consistent as I go along, making sure I have an equal number of stitches for each row going up, and it also separates the top of the clusters a little bit so they're spaced out more. So these cluster stitches are wider than normal just standalone double crochets. They're the same height as a double crochet, but obviously much bigger. So I want to skip over this single crochet. The chain 1 allows me to do that without my cluster stitch slouching in either direction. So I'm going to make my next cluster here in this chain 1 space between my single crochets. And I make 3 partially complete double crochets, yarning over and only pulling through the first 2 loops. I do that 3 times. 4 loops on my hook, I yarn over, pull through all 4, and I make 1 chain 1. And you can see how the clusters are standing up straight. They have a little bit of space between where I will make my single crochet on the next row, and there's no slouching, there's no popping out. We're making a flat piece of work. So in the next chain 1 space, yarn over, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, make 2 more partially complete double crochets in the same space. And I'm keeping relaxed tension here. I'm not crocheting any tighter or looser than I would with any other stitch. I'm keeping an even tension as I go along. They're spacing out nicely. Now this is an example of cluster stitches that are made in a sequence. I'm not combining stitches together. These cluster stitches are 1 cluster in 1 stitch as we go along. We're not combining multiple stitches from the previous row. It's just 1 for 1 as we go down the row. So we're not changing the shape of our work, we're just adding to the density. and chain 1. When we're done, skip the single crochet. In the chain 1 space, I'll make my last cluster stitch. And that's it. I'll make a double crochet to finish at the end. I'm not chaining 1 here because the double crochet is the end of my row. Now you can see I have 1 double crochet on each side of my row and 6 clusters in between. And my height along the row is nice and consistent. There's no bunching. The clusters aren't popping out in any direction. They're not slouching. Nice, consistent, and even stitches. As another variation of the cluster stitch. So the cluster stitch can be used in many projects, and it's common to find in crochet patterns. This is one of the more common cluster stitches. The pattern instructions should explain how to do the specific cluster stitch that's intended for the project. If the pattern simply says cluster with no explanation, I would question that, and I would reach out to the pattern designer. Since cluster stitch doesn't explain a specific stitch or sequence, there are so many variations. So you can try it with other basic stitches to create some unique crochet pieces. And if you're ready to give it a try, let me know in the comments. If you have any questions or need any help, please don't hesitate to reach out. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this helpful.